Just a reminder again, before we move into the presentation, if you have any questions in between, please wait for the mic to be given to you. As the time is limited, just try to keep the Q&A session under 5 minutes. If you have any further questions, please email the presenter or catch up with them while on the break. So the first session is sponsored by our gold sponsor, GSK. To formally commence our program, we are honored to welcome our keynote speaker, Varsha Davendra, as she shares insight on leadership and allied health. Varsha is an experienced healthcare leader with 15 years of clinical and operational management expertise across New Zealand and United Kingdom. She is currently serving as a clinical director of allied health, scientific, and technicals at Counties Manukau, and professional lead for occupational therapy. Her career spans senior leadership and advanced clinical roles in acute rehabilitation and community services, with major contribution to integrated stroke care, workforce development, and commissioning innovative models of care. Internationally recognized for service excellence, she champions collaboration and innovation with strong focus on better outcome of patients and advancing health equity. Please join me in welcoming Varsha Davendran.
Okay, thank you. Right, kia ora tātou. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai. Ko Fiji Islands o ko whakapaparanga mai no Aotearoa ahau. He whakaoranana hau ahau, Cedars Medicine ahau, Counties Manukau. Ko Tamaki Makaurau toko whenua tupu, ko Varsha Davendra ahau. Thank you everybody for letting me come and speak today. I just gave a little bit of a brief outline about myself and my identity, but I'm actually here to talk obviously about allied health leadership. So why do we focus on allied health leadership? You guys are all part of allied health, and allied health professionals play a key role in healthcare delivery, such as yourself, renal physiologists, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, and many other professions. Across the globe, there's about 43 different professions that are considered part of the allied health professionals group. It is also a very complex healthcare environment with pressure, resource constraints, and the requirement for interprofessional working. Strong leadership, not just managerial oversight, is essential. As I've said, we've got a very diverse allied health workforce that encompass both therapeutic and technical roles. My own personal portfolio, I've got about 12 different professional groups between my clinical director role and my OT professional leader role. As allied health professionals, how we engage, innovate, and collaborate helps move our professions forward. Today, my focus will be on compassionate leadership and how it helps in empowering allied health teams to move forward, but also I'll share reflections of my own experiences. So I'll start off with a few slides just talking about leadership and then compassion. So when we talk about leadership, we need to be clear that we aren't talking about management. Management often fundamentally leans towards processes. It's about planning, organising, budgeting, staffing, and ensuring systems are running efficiently. Leadership, on the other hand, is about purpose and people. It's about inspiring a shared vision, fostering collaboration, and motivating others to grow and progress. I occupy 2 leadership roles, but I manage neither money nor people. So what I have to heavily rely on is my relationships and collaborating with others and trying to have influence. In the health context, both are essential to have both management and leadership. Management ensures that we're practicing safely and we're compliant with services, and our leadership helps ensure that our services are evolving and that we innovate and remain compassionate and person-centred. Now, how many of you would have gone to any leadership courses or programs or postgrad papers? Have any of you done a few of them in your career? Yeah. And so I guess, a common leadership theories that come up in a lot of leadership programs is about authentic, transformational, servant or situational leadership. These are often referenced in leadership teaching. And if any of you have attended such courses, might be familiar with some of the key common approaches and theories to leadership. So what I'm saying will sound quite familiar to you. So what is compassion? If you can, take a moment to think of an incident where you received an act of compassion or completed an act of compassion. How did that act of compassion or extending compassion make you feel? Did anybody feel awful when thinking about that moment for themselves? I'm glad nobody's put their hand up. So my lovely Google generated word search came out with 5 keywords about kindness, understanding, care, empathy and love. But compassionate leadership is more than just words and notions we associate with it. So what is compassionate leadership? Now, the King's Fund Trust, which has supports the NHS Leadership Academy, defines compassionate leadership as involving a focus on relationships through careful listening, understanding and empathising with and supporting other people, enabling those we lead to feel valued, respected, cared for, and so they can reach their potential and do their best work. Compassionate leadership is grounded in the principle that care for others begins with genuine empathy and understanding. It involves being present, listening actively, and responding with kindness and integrity to support people's well-being and growth. The King's Fund Leadership Academy is where I did a lot of my early leadership training. I've since done other leadership programs and even completed my postgrad in leadership and management. But what I learned in that early phase of my career about compassionate leadership is still what resonates with me. So a lot of what I'm going to say today is born of those teachings and my lived experience of implementing them. And I think it's always important to understand what you connect with and what you value is what I would say you should consider in how you want to move forward as a leader. Because what appeals to me and what is my style might not be your style, and that's okay, because if I'm trying to fit in with how you work, I won't be true to myself, and I'll be faking it, and I'll be making mistakes, and I don't think it helps anybody in that instance. So the literature describes the 4 compassionate leadership behaviours as attending, understanding, empathising and helping. Attending means being fully present and giving others your complete attention. It involves listening with openness and curiosity, noticing both what is said and what is left unsaid. In practice, this means creating time and psychological space to hear people's experiences without judgment or distraction. Attending builds trust and signals that people's voices matter. Understanding is about seeking to comprehend the cause and context of another's experience or distress. It involves thoughtful inquiry and asking questions to grasp the systems, pressures, or emotions contributing to a situation. Leaders who prioritise understanding avoid assumptions and instead look for underlying issues that affect well-being and performance. Empathising means connecting emotionally with others' experience and responding with sensitivity. It is not about feeling sorry for someone, but about resonating with their perspective while maintaining clarity and balance. Helping, or as I like to call it, doing, is taking thoughtful, appropriate action to support or alleviate barriers. It moves compassion from intention to impact, addressing what can realistically be changed, while empowering others to find solutions. Effective helping is collaborative, ensuring that support strengthens autonomy and growth rather than dependency. So it's not all just about feelings. Compassionate leadership is grounded in research. The Harvard Business Review has done significant qualitative research looking at the impact of compassionate leadership and its impact. Publishing the results online, I put up a few statistics looking at how compassionate leadership and the research that they've done has led to a 30% increase in job satisfaction in the workforce, a 33% increase in organisational commitment, and a 22% decrease in burnout. Professor West, who is an expert in compassionate leadership theory, completed a review of the medical workforce for the General Medical Council in the UK. This is back in 2019. Reviews and publications identify the three predominant workplace needs that doctors identified was having autonomy and control, belonging, competence and effectiveness. His review highlighted the traditional hierarchical command and control approach that had historically been embedded in the NHS was actively diminishing the well-being and self-worth of doctors. In contrast, he highlighted where compassionate leadership was utilised, those three key needs of having autonomy, belonging and competence were effectively addressed. When we get to my references, I've actually put a publication about this research in the references, but there is also a podcast available from the British Medical Journal where Professor West is interviewed and he talks about the impact of compassion and alleviating the distress of our medical workforces in the UK. Now, I'm going to say compassionate leadership isn't all fluffy bunnies. I'm going to take a quote from Rasmus Haugaard's How to Do Hard Things the Human Way. He states, "The greatest challenge for most leaders is doing hard things in a human way. Leaders make decisions that impact others' lives. All leaders need to do things that negatively impact other people at times, and that is hard. It is hard because, as humans, we are good." And that is actually Rasmus Haugaard's book. So we often need to find a balance of care and courage. Trying to choose courage over comfort because our tendency is to avoid discomfort. But effective leaders step beyond fear or apprehension to address difficult issues with honesty and integrity. And without this courage, challenges are often left unresolved and trust erodes. We need to exercise caring candour by being compassionately honest. Growth requires feedback, yet feedback without compassion can be harmful. Caring candour combines kindness with directness, ensuring messages are delivered clearly and respectfully so that real understanding and improvement can follow. So why does this matter in the allied health context? In allied health settings, leadership is often distributed across professional teams, locations, and they require relational and inclusive leadership rather than pure hierarchical control. If I think about our renal team at Counties Manukau, we have myself as the clinical director for allied health. We have Mari Dorse over here, who's our professional lead for renal physiology, and we have Wendy Ravlich, who's our service manager, and she's a nurse by background. So you've got three professional groups trying to lead a singular workforce. Evidence shows compassionate leadership is supportive, but it enhances better staff engagement, well-being, and improved quality of care. And for me, compassionate leadership subsumes both collaboration and inclusive approaches of leadership. And for smaller workforces, that unintentionally have smaller voices, it is often how we get heard, by collaborating and by talking to one another. So, does compassionate leadership actually work? And here I'm going to talk about some of my experiences. In my first leadership role, I was tasked with establishing a 7-day service across 2 acute London hospitals, University College of London and the Whittington Hospital. We had 2.0 FTE staff and an occasional volunteer to cover a full 7-day roster from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Now, if you can figure that out, the math is not mathing in that situation. But was the service that we created successful? Yes. It was implemented, it was recognised nationally, and even nominated for awards. Did I experience good leadership during that time? Absolutely. I felt heard, supported, and understood. When challenges arose, my leaders demonstrated empathy and actively helped me remove barriers. But was I a good leader? No, absolutely not. I was so determined to prove I could achieve anything, even with the limited resources. In hindsight, I was probably building a luxury mansion in my ego. I mean, when I think about how I was as a leader back 15 years ago, waves of cringe overcome me because of my inexperience and naivety. I was taking pride in achievement rather than sustainability, and despite the accolades, the model was never viable from a workforce perspective. What I lacked then was compassionate self-awareness, the ability to balance drive with care, achievement with empathy, and ambition with wisdom. It was a pivotal lesson in understanding that leadership grounded in compassion creates lasting impact and not short-term success. A few years later, when managing stroke services across different London boroughs, my approach was different. The service I took over was seeing twice the number of patients it was commissioned to see. I think it was originally commissioned to see about 180 patients a year. It was seeing about vary between 340 and 360 patients a year. So this wasn't a place where I could step in and think I had all the answers. Staff and clients were engaged in identifying the issues. We had to be clear that resourcing and demand was not sustainable, and we worked with staff and patients to problem solve, evaluate effectiveness, and streamline the service. Was the service and team successful after a year? Yes, it was. We got an outstanding rating from the Care Quality Commission. We got the Guy's and St Thomas's Patient Care Award. We even at the end of the year, from doing work together, got an extra 50% staffing commission to meet our overall demand. Was I an effective leader then? Well, I believe I was leaps and bounds from the leader I was in 2010. The growth came through embracing the principles of compassionate leadership. I learned to attend, to be truly present, curious, and open to others' perspective. And although stroke was an area of my clinical expertise, the team had been part of the service far longer than I had. By understanding their experiences and empathising with the challenges they had faced, I was able to see the service through their eyes, and not just my own. The insight created the foundation for helping, taking thoughtful, collaborative action to move the service forward. This shift from directing people to deeply listening marked the real turning point in my effectiveness as a leader. One thing I will say, it is often easy to understand what you are familiar with. And as an occupational therapist, it's always been easier for me to lead and navigate the therapies. And it has been a positive challenge of growth to go beyond the comfort of my previous professional portfolios. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our renal model of care for the dialysis units at counties as an example. Historically, we had no defined model of care. The staffing skill mix was largely determined by whoever was available when vacancies arose and was largely a nursing workforce. Through a compassionate leadership approach, we began to shift this. By attending, being fully present and listening to staff, we created space to hear their concerns and their experiences. By understanding, we explored the realities of roles, workloads, and aspirations. Through empathizing, we recognized the pressures and professional identities that came with proposed changes. And finally, by helping, we worked collaboratively to design a new staffing model. A ratio of 2 nurses, 1 renal clinical physiologist, and 1 HCA for every 12 chairs. Now, this is something that we're introducing over time. Every 3 or 4 weeks, I receive the skill mix change where I'm changing nursing FTE to renal clinical physiology FTE. But a few years ago, I don't think we would have been able to broach these conversations with our counterparts. But again, it is about respecting and understanding the role that we play in caring for our patients. The model would have never emerged without genuine compassion and leadership, without listening deeply, valuing each other's perspective, and finding solutions that balance safety, efficiency, and patient well-being. Increasing the renal clinical physiology workforce required courage and care. Acknowledging the impact on reducing nursing numbers while empowering HCAs to take on appropriate tasks that celebrated the wider multidisciplinary team. It was through compassion-led dialogue and shared understanding that sustainable, person-centred change became possible. Now, these examples I've used have primarily been focused around allied health workforces, but I'm going to add in another example where at counties we were looking at increasing the hospital and the home services. So if those who aren't familiar with hospital and the home services, it's about transitioning patients from subacute care into the community. So hospital and the home had been set up at counties for probably about 5 years before I'd started at counties. On average, they were often seeing 5 patients. They had a caseload of five patients a week at any given time. When COVID came, we had a bit of an uptake so COVID patients could be managed in their homes. What had happened is, as soon as we were out of pandemic state, the numbers would drop. And so when I was attending a meeting on behalf of my boss, I got volunteered to lead this project. And the project was really dealing with the nursing and medical workforce at that time. And we really had to navigate and find out, why was it not working? Why did we have the service ready to take all these patients in the community and a hospital under pressure, ED overflowing, and we weren't getting the uptake? The numbers were still low as soon as we didn't have COVID patients. So we set about understanding and listening. And it became apparent. What we did was we went to every single division and we did an interview with the leaders going, do you understand hospital in the home? Why aren't you using hospital in the home? We asked hospital in the home, what are the challenges you're facing? What is your hesitation? What is your anxiety? Ultimately, what it came down to was understanding and trust. Now, me and my colleagues that were leading this project, we ended up having to organise a meeting where we had some of our clinical directors, general managers, nurse directors, service managers come in to discuss why we can't move forward. So imagine that a room full of people and you're the person going in and saying, none of you all trust each other. We called it the Red Room meeting based on like the Game of Thrones, because there was a lot of anxiety of going into that space and saying, actually, we're all part of this problem. So we had to navigate and align our values. And what became apparent is, even though there wasn't trust in that meeting and with those partners, they had the shared value of patient care. And once we asked the group to prioritise what they wanted, they prioritised getting these patients through ED. Am I running out of time? Getting these patients through ED and made a collaborative effort to increase hospital in the home there. Now, considering our project goal was an uptake of 50 patients a month, what had actually happened was, at the end of a year of doing that project, we were seeing over 200 patients in a month going through the hospital and the home services. And that was through navigating those trust issues, which was a lot about communication and education. You know, community were also afraid that ED was going to send them patients that they couldn't handle. ED was afraid that they would send patients that wouldn't be cared for. So it was actually them understanding what they wanted and what they could both provide. So I think allied health leaders can also provide value to non-allied health workforces. So that's some of the rosy stuff, but I think it's important to acknowledge that there are challenges and tension in practice, and it's not all gravy. Leadership in healthcare is often very target-driven. Time, performance metric resource constraints can make it hard to live up to our own ideals. And I resonate with that because this past year I've had to cover 3 separate roles, and do I have time to attentively listen? It's a struggle. I don't do it all the time, even though my intentions are there. Compassion doesn't mean avoiding accountabilities, and leaders still must address poor performance and ensure safety and standards. Allied health is also varied professions, varying career pathways, smaller cohorts of professional groups compared to medicine and nursing. And I think when you're trying to lead multiple professions with one approach, it might not always be consistent and successful. So my take-home messages today, hopefully some of them will connect with you, is allied health leadership is vital and requires relational, inclusive and compassionate approaches. Compassionate leadership is more than just niceness, and compassionate leadership demonstrates enhancement and engagement from workforces. I think compassionate leadership resonates with the allied health workforce due to the complexity of our roles, the spectrum of our practice, and the requirement for interprofessional working and shared decision-making. Now I'm coming to the end of my talk, and I will take some questions, but what I did also want to do was acknowledge that I couldn't do my role if it wasn't for the leadership I work with. So Murray, I'm going to get you to stand up and do a little wave. I'm assuming most of you know Murray, but if it wasn't for Murray, I wouldn't know what the renal workforce required in Counties Manukau. When we've been looking at remodelling our dialysis unit, Murray was our first point of call to get the voice of the renal physiologist acknowledged. And when she wasn't there, she made sure somebody from her team was available to provide that voice. I also need to acknowledge that when we were looking at the model of care, I did have to work closely with my service manager, Wendy Ravlich, and my 2 CNDs, Leanne Given and Meg Smith. If they weren't open to sharing their workforce and changing their workforce, we wouldn't have progressed the renal physiology team. I also work with my my clinical director and my GM that allow me to do my job, and also our chief professions officer, Sandra Nand. And obviously, our renal physiologists at counties work so incredibly hard. We have one of the most needy populations. We have a high population of renal patients, and if it wasn't for the physiologists contributing to their care, we would be struggling far, far more to meet our patient needs. So those are my acknowledgements. Are there any questions? Oh, and while they're testing the mic out, and it's okay if there's no questions, but just in terms of references, I do have some references there. I'm happy for people to reach out. The Lotus Compassionate Leadership Framework and Toolkit is actually something that the NHS developed that people can use to introduce compassionate leadership to their whole service. I've got a video there from Professor Michael West talking about compassionate leadership, but actually if you go on YouTube, they have multiple videos for the multiple services he's worked with in introducing compassionate leadership. And if you go on the NHS Leadership Academy, there's a lot of sort of information and resources there as well. So that information is for sharing and enhancing your knowledge. I connect with it, and it helped me progress. So I hope it connects with some of you and helps you progress in your leadership journeys. So, questions?
Thank you, Varsha. First question is from me. Sorry about that, because my physiologists are there. Everyone's question is, we are small in population, and then the career pathway is the biggest question. I know that. Just I want to Can you explain to us like what is the national processes going on for the allied health and also for a group?
Yep.
Thank you.
So I think career pathways for the smaller professions has actually been quite absent in New Zealand. I know it's primarily sitting with our Chief Professions Officer in New Zealand for all the different districts. And they're working on it. I think they are looking at comparing it to what other pathways are overseas. I think what they will do is provide a framework where there might be additional roles like designated senior roles, educator roles, coordinator roles. But that will probably also be implemented and identified depending on the size of the service and the volume of the service. So it's kind of like looking at what roles are required to take on what responsibilities to meet the needs of the service. So we won't be able to, magically create, despite experiences, and I think that's the thing, there's a lot of people that have a lot of experience, but they're not in a title role, but they provide leadership. So in terms of what's happening with the career framework, it's a bit of watch the space and see what the chiefs come up with. I know that they are looking at international models as well. I also know that renal physiologists aren't necessarily roles that exist in every sort of renal space across the world. However, we can compare what our skill set and knowledge base is compared with other sort of scientific and technical workforces.
Thank you.
I think that might be a wrap, Mary.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And again, thank you for allowing me to come and speak. I thank you for your time and appreciate you listening attentively. And for me, it's a privilege to work with our physiologists that we have at Counties Manukau. Thank you very much.
Welcome back, everyone. Please be seated. Moving into session 2, I once again thank our gold sponsor, GSK, for sponsoring this session. Let's begin the next segment of the program by welcoming our next speaker, Dr. Chris Hood. Dr. Chris studied medicine at Oxford University and Imperial College London. After serving in House Officer role within NHS, made New Zealand his home in 2004. He completed his renal training in 2009 and joined Counties Manukau Health as a SMO the following year. In 2014, he became clinical head of the renal department, and currently he's working as a clinical director of Division of Medicine. His professional interests include medical ethics, clinical leadership, and dialysis, with particular focus on home and community-based health therapies. Please welcome Dr. Chris Hood for his presentation on latest innovation in renal care.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Am I coming through? Yeah. So I'll start with my disclosures. The most important one is that I am a Counties Manukau man through and through. So I'm currently Clinical Director of the Division of Medicine. And before that was the head of the renal service there, so I've got a very counties perspective on things. For the last few months, I've also been a partner in Grace Clinicals, which is a New Zealand company that provides dialysis services. Now, in terms of the topic for today, however, I was asked to speak about innovations in renal care. That could have been an invitation just to talk about the future and whatever it might be, but what I've actually done is, they say that necessity is the mother of invention, and I believe that innovation is the same. So I've tried to focus on what's going to change and what's going to happen to us in the world of renal in the next few years, because the innovation is going to be the innovation that we're expected to do. So I think there are going to be changes coming for renal services. So it's really about what's going to happen in the future and how we're going to adapt. So it is a little bit of a crystal ball gazing exercise. So it may all be wrong, but this is my guess. So when I do that process, I think there's basically two big things that's going to happen. One of them is very much a something old, which is coming back, and the other is a something new. The something old is the perennial problem, which is that we do not have enough space to dialyse patients. We have more and more patients coming, and we don't know where to put them. Most of my time now, when I'm in my division of medicine hat and I'm trying to sort out the problems across medical services, when it comes to renal, I spend most of my time trying to figure out how we can build more capacity. But I'm not going to talk about that today, because it's really a different audience for that, and it's a more boring topic. But the other side is that if we have more patients and we have nowhere to put them for in-centre dialysis, the other thing that's going to happen, I presume, is that we're going to be asked to investigate alternatives, and that is the home and kidney first paradigm. So how do we look after our renal replacement patients without needing to put them into in-centre dialysis units? And how do we give them different types of dialysis? The second thing that's going to come along, of course, is automation and artificial intelligence. That's a technology that's out there, it's happening. There will be repercussions, and I've got a few thoughts about how that might impact our day-to-day life as healthcare workers. So there's something old. The last time I spoke at this symposium was 9 years ago. Then it was the sailing towards independence. So a decade ago, all we were talking about was home first. And that was something that the whole renal world was talking about. This is sort of towards the end of that period of time when there was a big focus on kidney and home therapies first because of the pressure of increasing dialysis numbers. What I spoke about at that meeting was a project we had just done at Middlemore, which had just kicked in, and that was called the ADAPT project. So what we did at Middlemore back in 2013-14 was we said that when a patient turns up needing urgent dialysis, instead of putting a line in and putting them on a hemodialysis machine, we'll put in a tank-off catheter and start their dialysis straight away. And therefore they never get to go to the in-center unit, and hopefully they stay on peritoneal dialysis. That was very successful, and I was there in 2016 giving the first 18 months or so of data that we'd analysed. And actually, if you look at the ANZ data, which is national data for New Zealand, about patients starting on dialysis, this is what modality they're on at 3 months. It's nice when you see one of your projects show up on national data with a big jump. So that was cool. And the good news is it's sort of stayed around, and it's still going today. We still have, I think, 30 odd patients this year gone through the system. So that was cool. And the second thing of note in this data is about here, when this is people who started off at 3 months on their dialysis, on their renal replacement journey with a transplant. And although the absolute numbers are smaller, you'll see that this also doubles pretty much. And that was something called the Live Kidney Donation Aotearoa Project, which then sort of expanded into other things. Mark Marshall was the person behind that. He's going to talk to you later today. But it does show what can be achieved if you innovate with different approaches. The sad news is that somewhere around here, possibly after something after COVID-19, it seems that we've sort of got off the boil a bit. So we're back down on our transplant. And although Counties is still doing ADAPT and it's still working nationwide, we're now down to here. So it does look as though we've sort of missed it a little bit. And meanwhile, the hemo has taken up the gap. In terms of absolute numbers, what's happening in New Zealand, this would be the same for Australia. Essentially, we're holding our numbers, but it's not going up with growth, and all of the growth is in-centre. And it's been going on for a long time, and we've kind of got used to it. People talk about what are we going to do, when does the crisis hit? I think we're in the slowly boiled frog phenomena, where we don't realise we're being cooked. I think we're already there. The good news is that people are still getting their dialysis sessions, just about. The bad news is that we have a major hospital in South Island that's just had to close an inpatient bay of beds to bring in outpatients to dialyse. That's a crazy idea, but it's been going on for a while. There have been occasions for short periods due to staffing situations where we've had to ask, where one hospital has asked their nephrologists which of your patients might be okay on 5 sessions a fortnight, which is a very dangerous route to go down. I don't think that's happening at the moment anywhere. We also have a problem of chairs being in the wrong place. This is a particular problem in Waikato, where there's enough chairs, but they're all in Hamilton. So Tauronga's full, Rotorua's full, Gisborne's full, and there's about 16 to 20 patients either commuting for 18 months or living in motels. We have a patient in Auckland at the moment who we're dialysing, who is number 7 on the waiting list to go to Gisborne, and he's sort of sofa serving in Auckland even though he's got a house in Gisborne. So we do need to do something. And I suspect there's going to be a call about doing something in home therapies. So I'm hopeful that we can reinvigorate this process, and the good news is that we have a start. So also back in 2016, I was making a case to the Ministry of Health during the Bill English time that we needed to focus on this, and they had to build me a unit. 10 years later, that unit is about to open. So this was the artist impression of what the unit was going to look like. This is the photo I took last week. This is the back, not the front, but it's not too bad. See, we've got the same little hash pattern, so they've sort of, I'm hoping they've kept to the plan. It's still got another 6 months of building, but it looks as though we're getting there. And this will hopefully be a source of innovation. So what will it do? This is going to be what's called a reception unit for dialysis. And the idea is that everybody who starts dialysis starts in this building, whatever type of dialysis it is. So a lot of our patients start with a line, and we have a procedure room so that they can come in and get their line, get dialyzed and go home and never go to hospital. This entrance here goes into a clinic space with 11 clinic rooms. This is where we're going to do all of our dialysis review, and our pre-dialysis nurses will be focused here. This staff area is where we will have social workers, transplant coordinators, pre-dialysis nurses, everything you need for the MDT. And up here in the main dialysis section, there's going to be no traditional in-center in this reception unit. It's all going to be focused on independence. Sailing towards independence, like we said in 2016. So we have 15 chairs here of what's called minimal assist, which is a shared care model where the patients are expected to do as much of their dialysis as possible. We have not 5 trading chairs, but 10. We have a big respite area for home patients. And we'll also do medical infusions there for renal patients. And the idea is that patients, everybody who starts comes here. They have a period in this reception unit. They get seen by everybody they need to get seen by. It might be a question of an elderly person having an advanced care plan made and limits of therapy. It might be a young person needing access and home training and transplant listing. But everybody comes here to get fully worked up before they head out to their final disposition of where they will carry on their dialysis journey. So hopefully this is going to give lots of impetus for lots of innovation and lots of improvement. We're going to hopefully increase ADAPT even more. We're going to hopefully get rid of our waiting list for home hemo training. We're going to have resource to be able to train people in the evenings if they're working. And the other stuff I've spoken about. This is pretty good for counties because I think it means we're the only service that I know of which, as far as I'm aware, has a full menu of dialysis services, which is quite the achievement. So every unit in New Zealand and Australia is supposed to offer hemodialysis, home hemo, COPD and supportive care, and are supposed to provide pre-dialysis education. But we have a few extra things in there. What we also have in counties is a minimal assist unit, evening dialysis availability for those who work, in-centre nocturnal dialysis for people who need 8 hours 3 times a week. We have our own nephrologists placing lines and Tenkoff catheters to allow peritoneal dialysis. We train patients online, we train family members, we'll be doing evening trainings, and we have these 2 rather unique things, one of which is we buy houses through a charity where if people can do home dialysis but they don't have their own home, they can dialyze in a community house. We just give them a key. And then ADAPT, that's the name of the program where we start urgent peritoneal dialysis. A lot of these things can be done everywhere, and they do make a difference. I saw a patient in clinic 10 days ago who told me he wanted to move to Brisbane for a job. I know this patient because he's the only patient I have who's taller than me. He's 6 foot, he's 2 meters, and he's on in-centre nocturnal, and he has 5 to 6 litres taken off each time. And I said, and he's still a bit overloaded. So he's managing, his heart is just about okay, but no matter how much we talk to him, he can't stop the drinking. So I said, look, I'm not sure you should go to Brisbane. I don't think, he said, well, haven't they got that? So I phoned up Ipswich, which is the suburb he was going to, and then I phoned up RPA in Brisbane, which is their mother hospital, and I said, look, you don't by any chance do community dialysis, because he could train, but he's not going to have a house in Brisbane that he can dialyse in. And you don't have community houses, do you? No. I said, do you have in-centre nocturnal so we can get 8 hours 3 times a week? No. So he's not moving. He's going to stay with us. Because I had to explain to him that without these additional services, he wasn't going to live very long. So it does make a difference to our patients to have these options available, and they are actually doable everywhere. And the big challenge, of course, is getting the culture, getting the enthusiasm to actually do it. It's not about resource. In the UK, they had a 5-year project to increase home therapies that was incredibly well resourced. Millions of dollars, everybody was pushing for this. The central office was the House of Commons. There were knights and there were chief doctors, chief of the NHS, everybody was pushing home therapies. And you can see that it was a fancy affair, and over the 5 years, unfortunately, home therapies fell. Because at the end of the day, if you don't get the buy-in from the people on the front line who are actually doing it, then all the resource and all the approaches don't actually do the job. And New Zealand's always been very good at avoiding that fate, so I'm hoping we can do it again. It's really about this guy. This is a little bit about leadership. You can find it on YouTube. I won't play it, but it's a leadership lesson from the dancing guy. This is a music festival, and an odd person starts dancing in an odd way instead of being embarrassed, and everyone's looking at him. But after about half a minute, somebody decides to join him. And then after another 30 seconds, there's a little bit of a crowd. And by 2 minutes, there's this beautiful, spontaneous moment. And I think ultimately, if we're going to improve the lives of our patients, it does take first followers, usually at the front line, to be interested in these kind of things. I don't think we're going to read the document from the Houses of Parliament. So that is what I'm hoping will come. I think the demand will be there. I see that Mark Marshall's going to give a talk about YPD, so that's the first time I've heard another talk about encouraging home therapy for a while, so maybe the message is going to start coming. I'll see what Mark says. So that's the first thing. That's my first prediction as to what might happen. The second thing, of course, is AI. Which everybody's talking about. The rise of the machines are going to take over and kill us all. Hopefully not. Hopefully they'll just become our best friends. I do think this will slowly impact our day-to-day working lives. The question is how. And actually, I just want to make a slightly technical distinction here between RPA, robotic process automation, and AI, and then there's a crossover. So RPA, otherwise known as bots have been around forever. Bots are usually used by companies to click on videos so that it looks as though lots of people are watching my video and I want to boost myself. I buy a bot and I get the bot to watch my video hundreds of times. So a bot does automatic processes. It's a bit of software that does automatic processes. The reason this is important is that AI is something which goes out to the internet with its large language model and accumulates everything and tries to come up with an opinion. But if you've got an individual patient in front of you, it may not be relevant. So the bot can look at your patient and then apply the wisdom of AI. So an AI-informed bot is probably the thing that could make the biggest difference to healthcare for individual patients and individual healthcare workers like us. And that's what's being slowly beginning to be developed. So just to reiterate, the bot takes robotic processes that humans can do and takes it out of the human and gives it to the bot to do. And the AI is trying to put a bit of human sophistication onto that bot. The way to think about it is the bot is a digital worker. So what can a bot do? Imagine somebody who is sitting at a computer with a list of instructions and they're told to make a surgical list. And it says you go to that people waiting, you go, you check that they need this operation. You click on them. If it's the right operation, you then select it and you put it on the list for theatre. And there's somebody doing that every day, but the bot can do that in the middle of the night, very cheaply, very quickly, and it's all done. So a bot is a digital worker, and you can actually watch the bot working, and you see the cursor move along and click on the patient, and then look at this, and it's as though someone's moving it, but they use the mouse better than we do. So what's that going to do to us? Well, currently I'm working with the lead bot guy for New Zealand, and we're going to look at monthly bloods. So you can click on a patient, look at their bloods. If they're all within a tight range and everything's great, you can tick them and say, right, don't need to look at this, don't need to check them, it's fine. You might decide that if you have 2 months where they're fine, the bot says you don't even need to do blood tests next month, you can wait 2 months. The other thing is audit. So a bot can read blood pressures from your patients and can read their weights, and a bot might say, gosh, these blood pressures are high, and you might get a list and it says, hey, you saw these patients and there's a high blood pressure, what did you do about it? And that will be a sort of like a quality assurance movement, so it will create reports for you to highlight things. We could have bots try and change things, but I'm very much aware that I don't think that's a good idea, and I want it to augment us and be a reminder to us and a quality improvement tool rather than anything else. I don't like quality improvement that tries to make idiot-proof situations. So my first rule of patient safety, attempts to reduce errors by making a system idiot-proof don't reduce errors, but they do create idiots. Once you take away responsibility from us, we just stop looking, we de-skill, and the mistakes still happen eventually. And I've actually been watching that happen for 20 years. Every time there's a list, every time there's an audit, there's foot checks, this check, that check, it just becomes automatic, and we sort of lose what makes us special. So I think these things might be coming quite soon. Other things to mention, there are already quite a lot of apps out there which can be used by our patients, but they don't seem to be, and we don't seem to be championing them. So there are dietetic apps where you can put in the food you're going to have, and they will tell you what the content is for your potassium, phosphate, protein. We don't seem to be pushing them enough. I don't quite know why. They are available. I was vaguely aware that there was some idea that you could take a photo of someone's foot to see if there was any diabetic problem, or something that you might need to see a podiatrist about, or that there was the potential for that. But I went on Google, and sure enough, these things do exist. So there's lots and lots of kidney diet apps, and yet I don't think any of my patients use them. I don't think any of the kidney diet apps do this yet, which is where you take a photo of your food and it tells you the information. But it looks like there are photos of food where they can tell you how many calories it has. And if that can reliably tell you the calorie content of that meal, I don't see why it can't reliably tell you the potassium content. So that might be coming in the diet space. And then I wondered about diabetic foot checks, so I put it in Google. And yet, it's there, it already exists. So I do wonder whether the apps are things, and this is particularly from a patient perspective, and what patients will be innovating. For many of our patients, I think we'll have to lead them to these apps, and we'll have to make sure that the apps are appropriate for our patients, because some of these look a little bit Californian. I would say. But I suspect that apps might become something else that we start to see in our day-to-day practice. So that's it. That's my thoughts about what sort of innovations we might see coming along. Will we be replaced by AI? No. I really don't think we will. And I actually think we should embrace it and make sure it's used correctly, and it can augment what we do. How will it be used? Is it just a cost-cutting measure? Is it a this? Is it that? It's all of them. And because it's within the health service, it'll happen relatively slowly. But I think it will happen, because it's going to go really quick out there, and even if it goes slowly here, it will still be noticeable. So yeah, that's it. Any questions?
Thank you, Doctor. You were saying that reporting, auditing, and apps to be used by the patient and by the robots, right? So basically, we are not even allowed to do it because of the limitation that belongs to somebody else, podiatrists, that they do that. Blood results, we can't do anything. We refer to you people. So when it's been limited for us, how can you promote for those robotic apps and etc.? Can that be, that barrier can be broken down for us to deal with it? That's my question.
So in terms of how does the bot have the authority to sign them off?
No, you were saying that these can do it.
Yeah.
Right? So you are saying that they can do, but when we are efficient enough to do that, but we are limited not to go for it. So can you?
Yeah, so it's weird. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, that's to do with credentialing. So, you know, we've had long barriers trying to get physiologists to have the same kind of authorities that other healthcare workers have. I used to be the physician representative for the board of dialysis practice, and yeah, there's a very good question: why would the bot be allowed to do this? The answer is that the bot never makes mistakes because it's digital, and if there is a mistake, it's a mistake in the programming, and the programming will be done by by me, but also by a group of people, and when these things get written, there's never a signature. It's just done by, you know, the endoscopy group, the renal guidance group, and that will have the authority to do it. And there may well be mistakes still, and these things will have to be improved. But when somebody says, well, how did this happen? The responsibility will go to a nameless group of people. And that is actually the key to why it's allowed, whereas asking a person to do something is a lot more difficult because of the responsibility. And some doctors are very keen on this because the doctors don't want the HDC to come and get them. They don't want the complaints, and they quite like the idea of the responsibility being held by the bot. So it's unusual, I agree.
So you can give that guidelines for us and check it out, trial and error basis, whether how skillful we can be. Those limitations. You give the limitations. This is what you need to. If you give the limitations for us, like the guidelines, whatever you said. So if you give it us, and why don't you give trial and error with us instead of robots?
Well, I think, you know, you get reports from bots, and bots will say these are ticked and these couldn't be ticked. So that might identify the ones that a person then needs to go through. But the process of monthly bloods, at least in our hospital at the moment, is the physician and a nurse or physiologist sit down together and they go through a whole lot of folders. And often they're normal and they just say no change. And the idea is that those normal ones, if it's very clear that there's no change, then you can pick up that folder and go, oh no, that one's fine, oh, we need to look at this one. So I imagine that might be where we end up.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Criswood.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Chris, for the enlightening session. I welcome Kristen to present a token of appreciation to Dr. Chris. Please. Before we move on to the next presentation, please make sure your phone is on silent mode. We now welcome our next duo of speakers, Dr. Alia Mahjoub and Dr. Alia Gomez Lozano, who will be speaking on shingles and RSV vaccines. Dr. Alia is a medical doctor and a senior medical affairs manager for vaccines at GSK, with postgrad credentials in medical development and a Master of Public Health. Alia is passionate about advancing vaccine access and awareness. Joining her is Dr. Maria, a scientist who loves exploring how our immune system works and how vaccine can help us keep us healthy. With a background in molecular microbiology, Maria has spent years researching infectious diseases, developing new ways to study bacteria and work on projects that may help vaccine and immune therapies make better for everyone. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Alia and Dr. Maria.
Well, thanks for the presentation. So I am Maria. My colleague Alia is sitting in the audience, and she will present the second half of this presentation. Just to let you know, we have our colleague Abby. Abby, can you say hi? So he's also here with us from GSK. This is my disclaimer as well. We all work full-time at GSK in the vaccines units. So today what we are hoping to talk to you about is the need of vaccination in renal transplant patients, especially in those patients that receive dialysis. I'm sure all of you know that they are at increased risk of infection. So today, I'm gonna start by talking about herpes zoster and its prevention, and then Alia is gonna talk to you about RSV prevention. So allow me to start by talking about the bidirectional relationship between infections and chronic conditions, right? Because it's a cycle, right? So a patient has a chronic condition, CKD, diabetes, and we know just because of they have that underlying morbidity, they will be more susceptible to developing an infection, either viral or bacterial, but we are talking about viruses today. So yeah, they are more prone to develop the viral infection, right? But also, they are more prone to have complications from the infection itself, and complications that can be sometimes life-threatening. Oops, sorry about that. And also, these complications will affect the managing of their chronic condition. So maybe you are thinking, okay, but we are renal physiologists. Why, what do we have to do with vaccines? And that's, the challenge bit that we are trying to overcome. Right now, nobody in the healthcare sector is responsible for immunization recommendations. You will tell me, and rightly so, GPs are in charge of immunization recommendations. And then I would ask you to think, when has been the last time you've received an immunization recommendation from your GP practice? And if your GP practice has recommended your vaccines, please let me know which one, because I will move to them. So yeah, what I want to tell you here is all specialists and all allied health practitioners that work with these chronic comorbid patients, we are responsible to make sure that they have access to the information of, all the health therapies that can help them, including vaccination. So without further ado, I'm going to talk a bit about herpes zoster. So herpes zoster is actually the reactivation of the varicella virus. So most of us adults have been infected with the varicella zoster virus during childhood. And then we have the rash, the typical rash. In this room, 99% of us have been infected with it. The varicella zoster virus lives in our bodies. Once there's a primary infection, it lives in our bodies forever. And then in the dorsal root ganglion. And then with age or moments of stress or moments in which we might be immunosuppressed in life, there will be activations of this virus. Sometimes these activations are subclinical and we won't have any symptoms other than we may be a bit more tired than usual. But other times we will have clinical manifestations of the reactivation, and that's what we call a herpes zoster infection. And then you can have the typical rash anywhere in the body, including the face and including your eyes. So what I'm showing you here is the prevalence of herpes zoster reactivations throughout the lifetime of adults. And what you can see here is for the general population in many different countries, we start seeing herpes zoster reactivations from age 50. That means, and I'm scarily close to that. So from age 50, our immune system starts to decline for all of us, no matter how healthy you are. And then because of our immune system decline, then the reactivations start to be clinical. We start to see the rash. Now, this is for the general population. So most of these data are based in immunocompetent patients. Of course, if you have a patient on dialysis with diabetes, with CKD, the reactivation of zoster will happen much, much earlier, even in teenaging years. So yeah, some numbers here. 1 in 3 people in this room will have a herpes zoster reactivation during our lifetime. So it's really a matter of most of us, will have to deal with this. And the good news is that right now it's a preventable disease because we have a very effective vaccine. Here it tells you herpes zoster can have many, many complications. The main one is post-herpetic neuralgia, PHN. It affects up to 1/3 of patients, and this is when the pain, the neurological pain from the infection, stays long after the rash is gone. This can be weeks, months, it can be years. It drives people crazy because there's no pharmacological way to control this pain effectively. Then another, of course, we can have strokes, MIs, we can have infections in the skin, we can have neurological sequelae in some cases. But another very common complication of zoster is ocular vision loss, actually. That's called herpes zoster ophthalmicus, and it's nasty, nasty. So here I would like to give you some data about how much increased risk do renal patients, how at much increased risk renal patients are at developing zoster. So you can see here in the orange table, so CKD patients have 29% more chances of developing zoster than the immunocompetent population. For diabetes patients, the risk goes to 24% more. So it's significant. And then on the graph on the right, what you can see here is the hazard risk, the relative risk that people with CKD, people on hemodialysis, people on peritoneal dialysis, and on renal transplants have of developing zoster. So again, very, very significant. Your patients are at a very increased risk of developing a zoster infection. So now I have very little time, so I'm not going to present to you the clinical trial data that we have for this vaccine, the recombinant zoster vaccine. Just suffice to say, we have data for 12 years. The vaccine efficacy after 12 years in immunocompromised and older patients is over 80%. And if you're curious about knowing more, please contact us and we will be happy to go to your departments to tell you more about it. But in a nutshell, the recombinant zoster vaccine is a non-live adjuvanted vaccine. The adjuvant serves to make the vaccine more immunogenic, meaning that it will be effective in older patients who have a decreased immune system, but also in immunocompromised patients. Because it's non-live, it's perfectly safe to use from age 18 in any immunocompromised condition, even patients with a stem cell transplant, so they are severely immunocompromised. The vaccine is perfectly safe and very efficacious as well. In New Zealand, the zoster vaccine is indicated for herpes zoster prevention in adults over 50 years. Any adult, just because you are 50, it is recommended. Unfortunately, it's only funded once you turn 65. On the good hand, the good side of this is that for CKD patients and patients with a renal transplant, we have fully funded zoster vaccine from age 18. So please know that your patients have funded access to the zoster vaccination. It is 2 doses. It is really important to receive both doses, and it's usually given 2 to 6 months apart. But if you need, it can be shortened to 1 month in patients for which there's a need. And as I mentioned, it's not contraindicated in individuals who are immunocompromised. And then I want to finish with this. This is not a GSK piece. This is the immunization guideline from IMAC, the New Zealand Immunization Advisory Committee, for patients on pre-dialysis, dialysis, pre, post, and kidney transplantation. It has all the recommendations for all the immunizations your patients need, not just the GSK ones, but all of them. And it tells you whether it is recommended and funded, or whether it's contraindicated. So please go to this link. I'm happy to share it with you. Please feel free to contact me if you need any further information. Also, before Alia comes to the stage, I would like to mention that some units in the country, dialysis units, have a vaccinator going to them and giving vaccines, all vaccines that they need, not just GSK. And please, if you are curious about this and want to know more and talk about whether this is right for your service, please talk to my colleague Abby sitting in the audience. And with that, I would welcome 1 or 2 fast questions before Alia comes to the stage, if there are any. I'll leave you with Alia then.
Thanks, Maria. Tafari Kia ora. My name is Alia Mahkoub, and I work with Maria on the vaccines space at GSK. I'm just going to go through these. Yeah. It's a lot of work we do in vaccines. Once I look at these slides, I realize just how much work and how much data goes into this. So I'm just very quickly going to talk about something called RSV. And for those of you who have little babies at home, every parent has been through this, right? So we know the bronchiolitis, and that's caused by the RSV virus. So it causes really severe disease in our young tamariki and our babies. But what it also does is that it is a really severe and serious disease in our older adults, right? And especially our older adults with comorbidities. And I'll take you through some of those comorbidities in a minute. Okay, so how does RSV present, right? And it presents, unfortunately, very similar to all other respiratory infections, right? So if you think about influenza, you think about COVID, exactly the same kind of presentation, right? So it starts off as an upper respiratory tract infection, so with a cold, a cough, a fever, some body aches. It usually resolves in a couple of days, and most of the patients get over it after feeling unwell for a few days. However, in those high-risk patients, right, and these are older adults, and when I talk about older adults, and I'm not being ageist, but we're specifically talking about 6 years of age and older, and those with comorbidities. Now, the comorbidities we talk about are those cardiorespiratory comorbidities. So think about your patients with COPD, with heart failure, and what we call metabolic endocrine comorbidities. So think about your patients with diabetes and renal disease, right? So the typical patients that you tend to see on a day-to-day basis. Now, the issue with these patients is that their immune system is already compromised. They don't mount a very good response to infection, and they tend to get more severe disease. And that's why we're really concerned about those patients. And what happens when they do get an RSV infection, or any other respiratory infection for that matter, not only do they get more severe symptoms, but it also exacerbates their underlying medical condition. So take a good example of your COPD patient with underlying heart disease, develops an infection, influenza, RSV, COVID, whatever it may be, ends up in hospital with severe pneumonia, exacerbation of their COPD, and exacerbation of the underlying heart failure. So a really bad combination for those patients to have. So I think I've spoken about those. So risk for severe disease or complications is age. So age is an independent risk factor. The older the patients, the more likely that they are to have more severe disease. And then we spoke about the comorbidities. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about immunocompromised patients, but Maria covered that quite nicely in her presentation. But your IC, or your immunocompromised population, is again a very highly vulnerable population that we worry about whenever they're likely to develop an infection. Okay, so I'll just take you quickly through the RSV vaccine, and just for some context, there is an RSV vaccine available in New Zealand. We launched it last year. It is a private vaccine at this stage, and I take my hat off to anybody not working within the funding environment or having to work with our funders, but it has been a challenge trying to get funding for this vaccine for adults. We're going in again with a proposal, and they're re-evaluating our submission. And what we're asking for is that this vaccine be funded specifically for older adults and adults with comorbidities. So we'll wait and hear what the outcome of that is. But it is currently available. You can get it from your pharmacy if you're 60 years of age and older. If you're 50 to 59 and you have a comorbidity, for example, heart disease, renal disease, you're diabetic, or you have underlying respiratory disease, you need to get a script from your GP to get that. But you can still get it if you're privately funding for that. Now, the story of the RSV vaccine is an amazing story because this vaccine has been in development for over 50 years. And about 2.5, 3 years ago, a couple of vaccines were approved nationally, overseas, as well as in New Zealand. Now, in New Zealand, what we have available is the adult RSV vaccine. It's what we call an adjuvanted vaccine, and it consists of this really amazing system that helps your body boost the immune response to the antigen, right? So it's kind of like a turbo boosted vaccine. It's been well evaluated in a clinical study, and what we wanted to assess was how well was this vaccine at preventing an RSV infection, a lower respiratory tract disease, in adults aged 6 years of age and older. And what I'm showing you here is just the composition or the demographics of the patients in the study. So about 30%, closer to 40%, so 39% of those patients had an underlying comorbidity. And if you look at the number of comorbidities, around 22% of those were patients with diabetes, and a smaller proportion were patients with liver or renal disease. And when we looked at the efficacy or how well this drug did in preventing an RSV infection in patients aged 6 years of age and older, we found that it had an efficacy of 82.6%. Now, just for context, what the FDA or regulatory bodies thought was a really good kind of minimally clinically important difference would have been 20%. So sitting close to 83% was a really good outcome for this vaccine. And what I want to call your attention to is that in those with underlying metabolic or endocrine conditions or cardiorespiratory conditions, you had an even higher efficacy rates of 92.1 and 100%. With everything in life, right, with benefits, they do come risk, and we have evaluated the risk associated with this vaccine. And what I can tell you is that common things are common. So if you think about getting an influenza or COVID vaccine, the same kind of side effects would apply here, right? So you'll have some pain at the site of injection, you'll have some swelling, some tenderness. You might feel, a bit of a kind of malaise or just feeling unwell for a couple of days, a little bit of fever. These are all common. The good thing is they last a couple of days and they completely self-resolve within 5 days. And that's it from my end, and I'll open up for questions if there's any.
Can you turn on?
Thank you for the presentations. I'm Mary from Cairo Dialysis, one of the community dialysis. So my questions may be for the Dr. Maria. One of our patients, recently we start doing this group vaccinations. Yeah, the vaccinator will come to the unit and do a post on the non-dialysis day. So we had a couple of patients that have done the singles. There's a good number of coverage in our unit. But I did notice one of the patients, after the single vaccination, about 10 days, developed the singles. So I want to know, is the singles related to the vaccination? I know just you mentioned as all the vaccinations as non-life. To me, that shouldn't be the reason, but just after about 10 days, so he developed. Have you got any similar case or?
We have data on that. Oh, sorry. So that's an excellent question, and thank you. You're absolutely right. The vaccine hasn't created the shingles infection for your patient. It's a non-life vaccine. Yeah. It's just, it has just a protein spike from the virus. It doesn't contain the virus. However, what we have seen is in older patients, so over 60, or immunocompromised patients, the vaccine itself induces stress in the body. Any vaccine will do that, or any infection. Zoster, one of the triggers for getting a zoster reactivation is stress in your body, is any kind of infection. So the first dose of the vaccine, and it only happens with the first dose doesn't give the patient immunogenicity, so full protection. So because of the stress of the vaccine, sometimes these older and very sick patients, they can develop shingles. Again, not because of the viral content of the vaccine, which is none, absolutely zero, but because of the stress, Okay. We see it doesn't happen after the second dose. So my question to you, did this happen with the first dose?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
after
right.
the first dose.
Yeah, so after the second dose, the vaccine is so effective at preventing shingles that we are not seeing any shingles reactivation after the second, but yes, after the first. So thank you for that question.
Okay. From my understanding, in our lifetime, we might had a vaccination in the earlier age, or you had a contact with the virus and you self-developed some immunities. So for this patient, he had a few times of singles. In this kind of case, do you think the patient still need a singles vaccination?
Right.
Yeah.
So I would strongly recommend that this patient gets the second dose. Unlike the RSV vaccine, which requires just one dose, the shingles vaccine requires two.
Yes.
And we see that patients are not protected until they've had their second vaccination.
Okay.
So in immunocompetent patients, if they develop shingles, the recommendation is to wait up to a year to give them the vaccine. This is why when we have shingles, we develop antibodies against the infection, and we will be protected for about a year. However, if your patient is immunosuppressed, as probably is the case, then that window closes to 3 months.
Okay.
So it's recommended that after his shingles reactivation, he gets his vaccine between 3 to 6 months, with the exception if he gets ocular zoster, then an ophthalmologist have to sign him off, so there's no ocular inflammation before he gets the vaccine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question.
So maybe, just maybe a quick thing around this RSV vaccine. And we know that there is seasonality with these respiratory infections, right? We've just passed the influenza season. But quickly, it's going to be upon us for 2026. So the important thing with these vaccines is that they can be co-administered, and that's just for logistics and convenience for the patients, right? That you can administer multiple vaccines at the same time. Obviously not in the same spot, and try to kind of exchange the arms, that your patient's not ending up with an extremely painful limb post-vaccination. But just think about that, and think about what's convenient for those patients. Because sometimes if they come in for one appointment, that might be your only opportunity to kind of get them protected, and you may not see them until the end of the season. Okay, so just thinking about that. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Alia and Dr. Maria, for that engaging session. I now welcome Saiju to present our token of appreciation. Our next speaker is Dr. Mark Marshall. He's an internist and nephrologist who completed training in both New Zealand and the US. He was a general physician and a nephrologist at Middlemore Hospital for 15 years, being a HOD and a chair of National Renal Advisory Board for several years during that period. He then left for industry to the director of medical affairs for Baxter International in the Asia Pacific region. During COVID, he returned to NZ as a senior research physician at a phase 1 clinical trial, until most recently returning to clinical medicine at Tauranga and Whakatane hospitals as a general physician and nephrologist. Mark is currently working for Waitemata Renal Service. Please welcome Dr. Mark Marshall as he shares his insight on the topic, why PD?
Hello again. I see a lot of familiar faces who are as old and decrepit as I am, but nice to meet everybody here. So I'm going to talk today about PD, and I'm doing this because I guess renal physiologists are moving into every area of kidney replacement therapy. If I had to look forward a decade or two, I think there's a lot of I think the nursing renal physiology split will be quite broad across kidney replacement therapy. And so when I talk about why PD, I'll make it very broad and general and not too technical. I guess the question is why not, or why would you do in-centre HD? I must confess I am biased. I have a bias. If I had renal failure, I'd probably do APD first, then I'd probably do home hemo, and then just to see out my final years, a transplant. But in summary, I'll start with just a bottom line first, if you like. I think globally, PD is doing very well. It's tough going in some places, thriving in others. It's quite safe and convenient. But I do think additional support is needed for PD patients to give people the best experience. You can throw PD and they can do it, but whether they have a good time or not depends on what you can wrap around them a little bit. So if we look at the world numbers on dialysis, there's been an explosion of dialysis over the last 20 years. It's quadrupled the numbers. There's far more people on in-centre HD and only a fraction on home HD. But if you look at the proportion, in fact, PD is doing about the same as it's always done. You might think PD is disappearing around the world, but it's not. It's roughly the same as it always has been. So this graph just shows the number of prevalent PD patients in thousands on the x-axis and on the y-axis. The next is time. You can see that I've divided the world into China, US, and the rest of the world. And I'd just like to make the point that PD numbers are growing astronomically in China, just unbelievably so, but all dialysis is growing astronomically in China. There are more Chinese PD patients than there are in the rest of the world. And those in the rest of the world and the US are growing, but a mixture. And so I'll just take a quick squizzy around the globe, really. Global growth is matching PD, but flat growth elsewhere, and mostly US and Chinese people. So if we divide the world into various places, overall, this is the percentage of prevalent patients on PD around the world. And you can see around the world in places that measure it, it's around 10-15%. And you can think about your own hospitals, what proportion of patients are on PD. We tend to be a bit higher than that, but around the rest of the world, it's 10-15%. If we look at Europe, this is from various registries and things, you might think there's been a bit of a catastrophe and a drop-off in numbers in Europe. And you would certainly read that in the literature, but it's not really true. Because here, around about 2007, you see a big drop in PD numbers, down from 15 to 20% down to 10%. But in fact, it's just that earlier on in the 2000s, only these countries reported PD numbers, the Scandinavian countries, Belgium, Greece, France and Britain, and they have lots of PD, whereas now there's all these obscure European countries, not obscure, that's rude to Ireland and Herzegovina and Bosnia and things, but there's a lot of other small chicken countries with only a few PD countries which are now putting their hand up. So it looks like that PD is tanking in Europe, but that's not really the case. However, before saying that that's not really the case, you've got to really look at the big countries in Europe. So here are the biggest countries in Europe that report PD numbers. And you can see that, for instance, in France, which is the orange one, they used to have 10-15% on PD. And despite France, PD is done differently. So in France, a nurse comes around to your house and does 4 bags a day, 3 bags a day. There's a small proportion do it themselves, but 80-90% it's all nurse-driven. And despite that, they've got now a dwindling PD population. UK's doing all right, Netherlands doing all right, but the halcyon days in Europe of having 20-25% of your patients on PD in Europe is kind of gone. Yeah. So, so in the first bullet point, there's falling EU prevalence. It looks worse on paper than it is in real life, but there's no doubt that in the EU, PD is not doing quite as well. In Latin America, it looks like actually there's growth in PD, and that probably is true. Latin America loves PD. They do it well. I don't know why they do it well, but they just do it well. It's often private, so like corporations have business deals with whole nations to supply their PD, like in El Salvador and things like that. and there's a lot of bells and whistles that they have that we don't have. So without, and some high, it looks like it's growing, however, more than it is, just because nowadays there's small countries that are putting their hands up, like El Salvador and countries like that. So in the big countries, however, there's certain things which I'll point out here. One is that in Mexico, where it used to be PD first by law, nowadays you can have HD, and it's the top line. It used to be 85% of people were on PD. Now it's less than 50%. So as soon as they made it legal, if you like, for you to do HD, a lot of people went on to HD, appropriately so. Argentina is doing very well. They're growing their PD. And Colombia, right in the middle, is the world star, really, of PD. They have the best programs, the best outcomes, best of everything is Colombia. A variety of different reasons. So Latin America is essential, but I didn't point out Brazil is in trouble. Brazil is awful economically, everything, and PD's tanking in Brazil. There's a lot of problems with renal replacement therapy in general. In North America, you would have to say these days North America is the centre of world PD. So whereas we used to laugh because nobody in the US was on PD, now there's a whole bunch of people. There's, I don't know, maybe apart from China, there's sort of thousands of people on PD there. And it's growing, and Canada's growing as well. So they're the PD centre really these days. And finally, Asia Pac. We have the big numbers. We've always had around 20% on PD. However, if we look across the board, it's slumping in most countries. Because they don't reimburse PD in Korea, it's tanked. New Zealand, it's gone from 50%, which I think was too much, down to about 30%, which is probably about right. Australia has gone down a little bit. Mainland China has been growing, as we said before. So without labouring it too much, Asia Pac and we still lead PD around the world. In Europe, it's tanking a little bit. In the US and Canada, it's thriving. So, and that doesn't count, and I guess if I had to pick how much PD should be in a program, don't know, but maybe it's settling at 15 to 20%, and I think probably a little more than that is probably right. But who knows? There is something I'll come to. And just bearing in mind that I haven't talked about some countries which are really pushing PD hard, like South Africa, Qatar, Kuwait. A lot of those countries are pushing PD. So why do people end up on PD? Well, one, because it's offered to them, and secondly, they perceive it to be safe and convenient. They don't really, in my opinion, they don't really think about these things too hard. They just want to make sure that it's safe and it's convenient, it works for them. I think that's how patients think about things. So why do we offer people PD? And before I talk about the reason, I'll just define the we a bit more, because we all think about hospitals are it, but we're not. We just do what we're told, you know. It's a whole lot of things around us which define what we do. So there's a very common model which is called the P model. Sometimes it's 4P, sometimes it's 5P, and it compartmentalizes the health system into a number of different groups beginning with P. First of all, there's the policy maker. And these policymakers, for us, it's the Ministry of Health. For other people, it might be the Department of Health and Social Services in the US, whatever. They establish who's eligible for treatment. They define what is a cardiac service? Do you do bypasses? Do you do this? Do you do that? And they also define how quickly people should have access to care. Very important, the policymaker. As important, there's a payer, and they establish costs and procure services. Here, it's the Ministry of Health mainly, but don't forget that our taxis are paid for by MSD. You know, there's many payers in our system. They're not just the Ministry of Health. And they're very important as well. And they're a problem in New Zealand, and I'll come to that shortly. There's also healthcare professionals. We coordinate and deliver care. We often waffle on about what's good and what's bad. We don't really have decision rights on stuff. And there's patients. All of us are patients, by the way. How many people have been a patient in hospital or with an illness? Here's easier. Who has not been to hospital ever? Put their hand up. Hardly anybody. So we're all patients. And also we all pay taxes, hopefully, and we're all funders of the healthcare system, don't forget. Might be the Ministry of Health who pays the bills, but we put money in their bank. So, and then there's a provider who does what they're told. So what are these people interested in? The policymaker, they're interested in votes and population health metrics. Do they look better than yesterday? Do they look better than Australia? The payer is only interested in financial sustainability and quality. By that, they don't care about who lives and dies. By quality, they mean outcomes over cost or whether you meet your budget. That's all they care about. Practitioners, we want good clinical outcomes, but probably as a bigger driver, I think, is we want good job satisfaction too. And the patient, they want just good outcomes and they don't want to pay anything out of pocket. And what we do is we just follow targets. We just do what we're told. That's how the system works. So why do we offer PD? Well, PD maximises population health within resource constraints. I guess that's what I want to say. It maximises the health of the whole population within resource constraints. How does it do that? Well, there's been many government-sponsored economic evaluations over the years. One's from Norway, that one's from America, that one's from Canada. They all, PD is cheaper. And it doesn't matter if you take into account failures, transitions, all that sort of stuff. And there's now countless economic evaluations. And they all kind of agree, PD is cheaper, even in countries where it used to be more expensive. One interesting study from Korea asked the question, it's cheaper, but what if we bump it up to 50%? Is it still cheaper? But there's a sweet spot. When you have too many people on PD, they start getting sicker, they start being more frail, they need more support, their time on therapy decreases, and there's a sweet spot. And in this particular thing, not from Korea, sorry, from Thailand, the sweet spot for them was 20 to 40%, which is partially why Thailand has pulled back on their PD first policy. They've found that it was expensive. People weren't lasting very long. They were disastrous. They were getting problems. But at PD at 20 to 40%, that's probably the optimal economic number to have on PD. In New Zealand, there's only one evaluation that's been done 1 million years ago by me and Tony Ashton, and PD was cheaper than other modalities. And that takes into account all hospital admissions, all transitions, everything like that. About half the cost. So why do I think there's a problem with the payer? In the old days, before budgets and before a lot of attention from big accounting systems, when I was, for instance, preceded Chris as clinical head or whatever, I could hide money. I could save money by putting people on PD and reinvest it in Centre HD or whatever. These days we don't. The money goes back straight to the payer because of accounting systems and doesn't get back to our patients or our doctors. It goes to a new cath lab. So I think there's a problem in this country with now better financial systems and tracking, which has hurt renal a little bit. And all around the country, there's been less ability to hide money and redisperse it within the healthcare system. So, PD is less expensive than HD in absolute terms, but cost savings aren't, you don't see the cost savings. They go to the cardiologist or the surgeon or whatever. It's a bit sad, but that's the way it is. What about practitioners? We care about patient quality of life and quantity of life. Let's talk about quantity of life first up. There is no doubt that 20 years ago, PD death rates were higher than HD death rates. A lot of people waffled on at those times, used fancy stats to perhaps tell a lie. But there's no doubt 20 years. This is just from America. HD is the blue line, PD is the yellow line. Those are deaths. Essentially, if you translate that, it's deaths per year. 25% is 250, 35% is 350. And it was the same in Australia and New Zealand. In 1998 to 2002, the ratio of deaths on PD to HD was about 10 to 20% higher. But now it's lower. And across the world, the death rate on PD is lower than HD. Why is that? I think it's because PD now has developed better routines, better SOPs, better clinical care. Remember, HD's been around since 1922, you know. PD, the first PD was done, I think, in a goat sometime pre-war, but in humans it was sort of 1980s, really. There's better patient selection, better transitions. We don't wait till people die before sticking them on HD. We see them falling off the perch. And also, mainly, we have much lower peritonitis rates. Compared to when I was a registrar, the ward was full of PD patients on peritonitis. So we measure PD peritonitis rates by the number of episodes per year. So the red dots here indicate the global change, and all the big dots are all these different countries. And around the world, the peritonitis rate is halved over 30 years, which means people die after peritonitis. They die either today with the peritonitis or within 3 months or 6 months from heart disease and other stuff. Just like people get heart attacks after COVID, after peritonitis, people get heart attacks. So it's not just a peritonitis, it's always a peritonitis. And New Zealand's done all right. We're kind of the worst in the world, except for Scotland. Scotland are worse than us. But we still have one of the highest peritonitis rates in the world, but even we've gone down by 50%. So we're doing a lot better, and that's saving lives. There's only a couple of clinical trials which have randomized people into HD and PD and said, what is your survival like? One is from Holland, one is from China. If you put those together, there's around about a 47% lower mortality risk in people on PD. Now, I don't want to, you got to be very careful when you interpret this. This is people who are eligible for both, not everybody. So if you put everybody into those studies, I'm sure PD would do pretty badly. But in people who can do both, you should really try to get them on PD because they'll live a bit longer. That's what the data tells us. Quality of life, and this is also reflected by Cochrane analysis of observational studies as well. There's not as dramatic a lower mortality, but it's still there. Now, what about quality of life? There are countless studies on quality of life between HD and PD. And in general, it's a little bit better on PD, although I've got some comments on that. First of all, when we talk about quality of life, it's a really hairy thing. If somebody asks you to define quality of life, you'd struggle to if your younger sibling said, what do you mean quality of life? You would struggle to define it, right? There's so many different things in quality of life. There's family interactions, there's how you feel physically, emotionally, mental health, all that stuff. So a lot of quality of life stuff is a bit so-so because people don't really define what they mean. So in the China Q study, which was one of those randomized controlled trials, they actually reported each different quality of life thing. And if on this graph, you don't need to understand a lot of stats, but if the dots and the whiskers are to the right-hand side, it's better for PD. If it's to the left-hand side, it's better for HD. I want to make two comments here. The first one is nothing is that side favouring HD. Most things are that side favouring PD. What is lower here is the symptoms of kidney disease, symptoms of kidney disease. Fluid overload, all the uremic type symptoms, and less pain. And also here, sleep is better. Now this was China. Not many people are APD, so it's hard to generalize that. But the randomized controlled trials would say those are the major things. If you're talking to patients, you can say, look, on PD, I think you can do PD. I think you're good for that. I think you'll probably sleep a bit better. You'll probably have a bit less symptoms, and you may live a little bit longer. As I think fair and balanced, then you can say that. So in patients who are reasonably able to do both modalities, survival and quality of life is as good on PD and likely to be better, in my opinion. I think there should be people on PD. I don't think it should be 100%. I don't think it should be 0%. I think it should be 20 to 25% and captured very carefully. What about patients and convenience? This is ultimately why people choose to do PD. Probably the best paper is from Germany on this, and the main reason people choose PD is HD, as they say, I need to see my doctor frequently. And sometimes that's true, sometimes it's BS. And you've got to evaluate that, and that's the major thing which people who choose in Centre HD think about. For PD, it's invariably, I want to be independent. And so, are we supporting people to remain independent? There is a few things that we're looking at these days with assisted PD, other technical things. But one thing I want to show you from New Zealand as well as overseas is that when you look at the trajectory of people's quality of life over time, so this is when they start, this is years, on PD, I've mislabeled this one on should be down here. On PD, their quality of life goes down faster the more they're on PD. And it doesn't matter whether it's physical or mental. So they fade faster on PD than HD or home HD. In New Zealand, it's exactly the same. So here is their at PD and HD at 0 time when they start. All these different domains of standard of quality of life are the same. At 1 year, HD have improved. At 1 year, PD have not improved. And this is in several hundred New Zealand patients. So I think that PD is associated with a greater physical drop-off in physical and social functioning despite comparable general health. So, just to wrap up, a summary, PD is alive and well, it's safe and convenient, but I think given that people fade faster on PD than they do on HD, I think we need to wrap around additional stuff to them. It's not being done, I don't think. Overseas, I see a lot of different models of PD which involve a lot more psychological care and support given to patients who do PD. And I think the money's there for it. Instead, it's going into a cath lab. That's it. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Can I ask you guys questions? Who's looking after PD patients at the moment? Anybody? One, two. Okay, right. Who wants to? Some, yeah. It's kind of cool. It's not based in the office, it's based in a car. Make sure they give you a nice car. And, it's good fun. And I think there's a lot of things like assisted PD, all that sort of stuff. It's starting to kick off around the country. There's now at least a couple of assisted APD programs, and it's a lot of fun doing something new as opposed to just sticking with the same old, same old. Right. Okay. Good? Okay. See you next year. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Dr. Mark, for your insights on PD. Now I welcome Aparna to give a token of our appreciation to Dr. Mark.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, that's what I need with my stomach. Yeah. See you later. Thank you.
See you. Up next, we are delighted to welcome Helen Davier, who will be talking about the National Renal Network. Helen is a program manager in the National Clinical Network at Health New Zealand, brings over 20 years of healthcare experience across New Zealand and the UK. Helen has led both community and secondary care services through her extensive background in service and business management. She holds a master's in healthcare leadership and management, a graduate diploma in information systems, and a bachelor's of art. Outside of work, she enjoys life in Tauranga with her family and a lively collection of pets. Please join me in welcoming Helen Davier.
Kia ora. Thank you for having me. So I've been asked to come and give a little bit of information about the National Clinical Network program that we've been running. I think you had our co-lead, Drew Henderson, who came and spoke to you last year, I believe. So hopefully you've had a little bit of background onto what the clinical networks are, but I'll talk you through what they are anyway. So the clinical networks were set out in Paiora, which was to ensure that we are delivering clinical voice at the heart of all of the decision making that we're making in the country around New Zealand. So that was what they were established to do. So basically, one of the main reasons for the establishment of clinical networks was to reduce the unwarranted variation that we see across the country and to ensure that we had clinical decision makers reviewing that unwarranted variation and making recommendations about how we could improve things. And so I think the team itself sits within the Chief Clinical Officer's team. So we report into Richard Sullivan, who reports into the Chief Exec. So we are surrounded by the clinical chiefs. That's who are within our group. And I think a large portion of what we've been doing is looking at improving guidelines and standardising care, and then also trying to make recommendations and developing innovative solutions around how we can fix some of the really intractable problems that we are seeing in healthcare in New Zealand. So this is a complicated slide which basically tries to give you a bit of an understanding about the structure. And so, as I've said, the main drivers are around driving change and consistency, reducing inequities, and also we play a role in informing national decision making around investments and workforce planning, and sort of basically ensuring that wherever you live and whoever you are, you receive the same outcomes. So that's around equity. It's about ensuring good access to our services. And so we, as I've sort of discussed previously, this is around developing national standards, identifying variation, tracking that, and then developing solutions that we feel that might address some of that unwarranted variation. As I've said, we report into a national clinical director who reports into the chief clinical officer. So that's the structure within the service. So I've talked about equity. We know that kidney disease in particular, or a lot of our long-term health conditions affect people differently depending on their ethnicity, and we have an obligation under Te Tere to ensure that we are delivering equitable services in partnership with Māori and Pacific communities and delivering better care. So this is all around ensuring that we are partnering in appropriate ways, that we develop cultural competencies, that we ensure that resources are allocated to where they will best address those inequitable outcomes that we see, and really ensuring that we've got really good policy development and implementation. So there are now 14 clinical networks across New Zealand that we've established in the 2 years that we've been set up. And we've broadly divided them up between sort of system and long-term conditions, and then the ones that support the delivery of the aspirations around health targets and fair access. So you can see that renal is up there. That's the network I currently look after, and I'm also providing a bit of program support to CKM, which is the cardio-kidney metabolic disease, which is a collaboration between diabetes, renal, cardiovascular and stroke networks. So all the co-leads for those networks have come together and said, hey, actually, we're seeing a lot of the same patients. They have the same comorbidities. Let's work in a collective way across those conditions to ensure that we've got the best management that we can for our patients. So that's where we sit at the moment. We've also got some around cancer, eye health, radiology, and we've just set up some expert advisory groups. They're mostly looking at harmonisation of access targets at the moment. So we've got some in gynae, orthopaedics and ORL. There will be more coming. There's discussions around a respiratory network, endoscopy, lots of things going on. So yes. So at the moment, that's what we're working on. So the green ones, if you're wondering what the colour coordination is, the green ones are ones that are alive and kicking and have been in place for a little while. The yellow one is pathology, which has just had its first face-to-face meeting, which is also another one of my networks that I'm looking after at the moment. So I thought I'd just give you a little bit of background to the National Clinical Network for Renal. So we've got 11 strategic group members. I've got some graphs there. You're probably a bit tiny and you probably can't see them, but basically just showing that we've got representation from allied health, nephrology, GPs, nursing, and we've got we've got 5 members from the northern region, and then we've got a couple from each of the other regions. So we've tried to get a good spread across the country of both representing the MDT, but also ensuring that we've got coverage from across the country in terms of getting the voice of the country heard. So we've got 5 current working groups that we're looking at the moment. So there's one there around the models of care for CKD, so chronic kidney disease, one around the models of care for dialysis. We also have a group looking at data quality and performance. There's also a fairly newly established supportive care group looking at how we can improve care for patients who dialysis might not necessarily be the best intervention for them. And then we also have a very strong consumer and Fino voice group that informs the decisions that we make. I think we have a member of the consumer and Fino voice group today. Yep, so you'll meet and you'll hear a bit more. I won't steal his thunder. He can talk about what they have been discussing and what role they play in our network. So we've got kind of 5 key sort of priorities. Although I've got 6 bullet points there, so never mind. I can't add. So the one at the top there is around the development of a CKD dashboard and the development of some KPIs that we can use to track how we're doing and how the country's doing. So the CKD dashboard is taking information from our Health New Zealand systems, but I was also pulling in information from the labs and also from pharmacy, so we can see prescribing information. So it's all community-based data. So we've currently onboarded data from the Northern region and Te Waipunamu, Central region and Te Manawataki are proving a little more challenging in terms of the architecture of getting those of that information in there. But ultimately what that dashboard will allow us to do is to identify where we have pockets where we suspect that somebody might have CKD because of some tests that they've had, but may not be on a treatment, might not be on the appropriate medication treatment pathway, or they might have incomplete testing and not have had the follow-up diagnostics to confirm that CKD diagnosis. And so there's a bit of work going on in that space to ensure that we can target care as best we can to people that need it, and also to help us try and predict numbers coming through that are likely to hit secondary care services at some stage. So it sort of has a twofold kind of purpose. So that's exciting work that's being led out by Data and Digital, and we're providing some clinical input into that work. We're also developing a national CKD pathway that's currently out for consultation with the unit heads at the moment. And that is really the aspiration behind that, is to try and provide some consistency, to have one sort of, as much as we can, one model that works for CKD across the country. There obviously will always be local variation where that's appropriate, but just trying to get some standardisation in. So that's work that's currently underway. And the dialysis capacity modelling work that we are doing, so we're doing that in partnership with the infrastructure and investment team within Te Whatu Ora, and also with the clinical services planning team as well. And that work really is to try and, again, provide some standardisation around predicting dialysis numbers, so that we can see what our current number of chairs are and how that compares with what we are predicting we're going to need, and predicting that forward. And that will just help in terms of informing planning for where we need to put additional capacity, and also informing our infrastructure investment plan in terms of where do we need to build next, where are the pain points likely to be, so we can try and get ahead of the curve a little bit, rather than always just running to catch up in terms of developing additional capacity. And then also supporting the dialysis capacity work is some work that we're doing around the model of care for dialysis, which Sheju has obviously been involved in providing some support for. So we're doing a bit of work around trying to understand the needs of the patients, and then framing up in terms of the needs for their clinical requirements, and what MDT support is needed to deliver the best care. So that's work that's ongoing at the moment. As supportive care, as I've said, is a fairly new group. They've met a couple of times now. At the moment, they're undertaking a bit of a stock take of the country in terms of what resource there is to support supportive care in patients, and that will then move into some probably developing some guidelines or recommendations about what minimum standards of care should look like, and how we can support people to get access to supportive care regardless of where they live, because we know there's some pockets of excellence, and in some areas it's very difficult to get support with that. And we've got representation from palliative care on that group, so it's about working with our palliative care colleagues in that space. And then the other thing is looking at a bit of an integrated hub model. So our co-leads, Drew and Leanne, are meeting with the Minister on the 5th of November, and one of the areas for discussion has been around how can we provide some support that straddles that space between primary and secondary care, to try and manage early CKD better, make sure people are on appropriate medications, and that will develop more into using the dashboard information to inform practice, and working with new models of new ways of working and new models of care. So that is all I'm going to say to you on that. So I'm very happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Helen, for the wonderful session. Now I welcome Mary to present a gift for our speaker. Up next, we welcome our next speaker, Sonia George. Sonia is a clinical renal physiologist currently working at Totora Dialysis Unit in Mangere, part of County Smanuka. She completed her bachelor's degree in renal dialysis technology. Her career has taken her across the globe, from India to South Africa, where she worked for many years before moving to New Zealand. Passionate about sustainability, Sonia is a strong advocate for reducing healthcare carbon footprint through environmentally conscious dialysis practice. Please join me in welcoming Sonia as she shares her insight on green dialysis and the Totora model.
Hello everyone, I'm Sonia. I'm a clinical physiologist working at Totora Dialysis Unit, which comes under Counties Manukau DHB. I'm so excited to share our green dialysis journey at Totora Dialysis Unit. As you know, green dialysis has become a burning topic of today. It is about making kidney care more environmental friendly by reducing waste, conserving water, lowering energy use without compromising patient care. This presentation originally belongs to my charge nurse manager, Mr. Babu Ramalingam, and I'm presenting this one with his permission. So moving to the next slide. In this presentation, I'll be explaining the Totora experience of using RO reject water for toilet flushing and use of central acid delivery system for dialysate production, and how all these measures contribute towards green dialysis. I would like to give a brief introduction of our unit. We have a total of 30 dialysis stations. We run 3 shifts a day. We operate 6 days in a week from Monday to Saturday, and Sunday is closed. On average, we perform around 20,000 dialysis sections every year. In terms of layout, our dialysis unit is located on the first floor, and the RO reverse osmosis system is located on the ground floor. So what is a carbon footprint? A carbon footprint is the total amount of greenhouse gases, mainly carbon dioxide and methane, that are released into the atmosphere as a result of human activities. These gases trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere and contribute to global warming and climate change. So this carbon footprint is measured in kilograms or carbon dioxide, tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Hemodialysis is one of the most resource-consuming medical intervention. It consumes vast amount of energy and water, and it generates a considerable amount of non-biodegradable plastic waste. It is estimated that 7.1 to 10.2 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions are generated per patient every year. So, going to the details of green dialysis, Professor John Agar, an Australian nephrologist, is the first person to introduce the concept of green dialysis 2 decades ago. He did his practical real-world innovation within his own unit in Geelong, Australia, and it was the first one globally to implement major changes. His key innovations were reuse of RO reject water and use of solar energy to run the unit. His philosophy is often summarized by the 3R approach, that is, reduce, reuse, and recycle. In Totora, we reuse RO reject water for toilet flushing and use automated central acid delivery system, EcoMix by Bebron, for dialysis fluid production. During the water treatment process for dialysis, a large amount of water is rejected by the RO system. With modern technology, we are able to get a better recovery rate, but we are able to get more water purified and only less amount is wasted. But still, the amount of reject water is significant. This water is good enough for non-clinical uses. So at Totora Dialysis Unit, we store reject water in a tank shown in this picture, and we use it for toilet flushing. By doing this, we save thousands of liters of water every month and make our dialysis unit more environmental friendly. Now, let's talk about the dialysis fluid. If you minimize wastage of acid concentrate, it will save money and carbon emissions through reduced production and transportation requirements. You all know that acid concentrate is needed to produce dialysate, which is used for online priming of dialysis machines. And it is also used during treatment, and it is also used for the flushing of blood lines after dialysis. In Australia and New Zealand, Individual acid cans are typically used for each dialysis sections. And individual canister volume ranges from 3.5 to 4.7 liters. And with the 1:45 dilution, we are able to produce 150 to 210 liters of dialysate. In Totora, we did an internal audit to see the carbon footprint of individual canister. We use Bebron Dialog IQ machine and we use Bebron acid concentrate shown in this picture. The volume of the can is 4.7 liters. Any acid not used during the treatment is usually discarded. With standard dialysate flow of 500 ml per minute, we have 1 to 1.5 liters of unused acid wasted with each dialysis treatment. As I discussed earlier, we do 90 treatments a day. So with 90 treatments, if single cans are used, we may generate 135 liters of unused acid waste, which is equivalent to fill 25 plastic cans. The price of acid concentrate is currently approximately $2 per liter. So just imagine how much money is wasted with unused acid concentrates. To summarize, purchasing acid volume in excess of that is required for dialysis treatment is costly and it is wasteful. And we also need to consider that it takes a lot of storage space and needs manual handling. Have a look on this picture to see the carbon emissions from single cans. You see the package and the plastic waste generated by the empty cans and the pallets used for the packaging. Carbon emissions from transportation, manual handling, and storage space needs to be considered. Optimizing acid concentrate consumption. This is a paper published by Australian and New Zealand Society of Nephrology. It has some recommendations, like we can estimate how much dialysate is needed for each dialysis section by checking the duration of the treatment and the dialysate flow rate, and this will help to choose the right acid can size, thereby reducing waste. Studies show that increasing dialysate flow beyond 1.5 times the blood flow rate does not significantly improve dialysis clearance. Some machines like Fresenius have autoflow function, which automatically adjusts the dialysis flow to blood flow. And this will significantly reduce both water and acid concentrate usage compared with standardized dialysate flow rates. Use of HDF post-dilution increases acid concentrate use by 15% per treatment. And if it is HDF pre-dilution, the acid consumption is 30%. The above-mentioned paper also talks about using a central acid delivery to optimize acid concentrate consumption. Central acid delivery system involves a central holding tank that delivers acid concentrate through the distribution loop to the outlets of individual dialysis machines. This ensures that only the volume of acid required for the treatment is used and nothing is wasted. In addition to avoiding the waste of acid, this reduces packaging, manual handling, cost, and carbon emissions from production and transportation. The methods of acid concentrate for central delivery can be either delivered via a tanker truck to a central holding tank, or it can be delivered in large packages, or it can be mixed on site from dry powder and stored in a central holding tank. Tanker truck delivery of acid concentrate for CDS is being increasingly used in UK and Europe. However, this mode is not economical for most dialysis units in Australia and New Zealand due to distribution distances. Central acid delivery system mixes a dry acid powder concentrate with RO water and stores the solution in the central holding tank, from where it is distributed to individual dialysis machines. In Totora, we use automated CDS system, which is known as EcoMix Revolution. Most of the patients with a standard dialysis potassium concentration use EcoMix. We use individual 4.7 cans if patient needs high or low potassium dialysate. The first picture shows the EcoCart and the microprocessor, and there is a mixing tank behind the microprocessor. The second picture shows Eco tank, where the final concentrate is stored. So let's go to the details of mechanism of action. Please have a look on this picture. The EcoCart is placed in front of the EcoMix unit, and it is connected to the system using couplings. The barcode is scanned, so the system can identify the exact formulation. Then the system fills the mixing tank with the required quantity of RO water according to the scanned formulation. Then this powder in the cartridge is dissolved into the water. The system may perform multiple mixing cycles to ensure complete mixing. After mixing, the system uses density sensor to measure the density of the produced concentrate. If the density is correct, this batch can be released, or else additional mixing may be required, or additional mixing or lab testing may be required. The final solution is transferred to the Eco tank, and from there it goes to individual dialysis machines through distribution loop. EcoMix is rinsed automatically with purified water, and after each use, it will clean automatically to ensure consistent dialysate quality. In Totora, each EcoCart produces 750 liters of acid concentrate, which is sufficient for 4 days of dialysis treatment in our unit. Now let's compare the cost difference of using individual cans and EcoMix. Half of our patients use EcoMix and the other half used cans. Acid concentrate requirements for treatment with the EcoMix was 51,000 liters per year, whereas with the individual can, it was 66 liters per year. So with EcoMix, we had $30,000 savings. Cost with recycling empty can also needs to be considered. Recycling of empty plastic can cost around $200 per week. In a year, it will be $2,600. So let's go to the advantages of central acid delivery with automated mixing systems like EcoMix. So less waste to be disposed, and it will reduce the staff manual handling. It saves time setting up and clearing away after dialysis, and there will be subsequent savings from the facts mentioned above, and there will be reduction in the carbon footprint. The EcoMix revolution can handle multiple acid concentrate type by using different EcoCart cartridges. When a new EcoCart is connected, the system automatically reads the barcode, recognizes the formula type and the target concentration. It then adjusts the water volume and mixing parameters accordingly. So it can safely prepare multiple concentrate types using the same machine just by swapping the cartridge, not by changing hardware. All you need is different eco tanks to store different concentrate, just like the one shown in the picture. This paper shown in the slide is based on a study done in 30-bedded dialysis unit in the UK after switching to CDS from individual cans. The study claimed carbon emission reduction of 33,841 kilogram per year. With the above reference, Totora can claim that it has been contributing 17,000 kilogram per year. So let's go to the limitations. Limitations with the automated delivery system are: you need space for storage tank to store different concentrates. You need to consider the capital expenses of installing the concentrate distribution loop, storage tanks, and mixing devices to the new units. And you also need to think of the fact that retrofitting an existing dialysis unit with a new system will add expense. So, to conclude, the dialysis team should review the design of the current and future dialysis centers, as well as policies to determine whether reduction in carbon emission can be made or not. And also, investment in modern technology might help to reduce carbon footprint. And you can take Totora as an example for this. I would like to acknowledge contribution of Diverum for installing water treatment system in Totora, and for and Bebron for installing Ecomix Revolution. Countess just took over the unit from Bebron a few years back. These are the papers I use for reference. Sustainability starts with each of us. Let's continue to innovate, collaborate, and inspire. Let's act today for a greener, healthier tomorrow. For our patients, for our community, and for our planet. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Sonia. Any questions?
So, Sonia, just one question. What is the testing regime for the loop? Do you do any microbial testing or?
For the Ecomix?
For the Ecomix loop?
Actually, at the moment, we didn't have any issues, and we do for RO, we do every month. But for this one, we didn't have any problems so far, and we never did it.
Have you got any plans for the future? Sorry, if it is a tricky question, I'm just wondering, because it's a distribution loop, and how do you ensure that microbial growth is not there?
We check machines every month. We check dialysate every month, so we know if it comes positive, then there will be some problem.
Okay, thank you.
I will answer the question. We are doing the water, our water test. Every month we are doing the endotoxin and bacteriology test, and also we are doing the dialysate twice a year, and then online fluid once a year we are doing it. Yeah. Even though ISO standard says that diafilters are there, no need to do it, but we have to, here and there, sometimes we get the positive results, so we do the quarantine. We have got the policy and procedure, we quarantine the machines, and then we do the end loop or water, and also we check the dialysate. So far, we don't have any problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia, for your insights on the green dialysis. I now kindly welcome Vinish to present a gift for our speaker. We welcome you all onto the stage for a short group photo session. Please join us onto the stage.
Before we move to lunch, please, can we have a group photo? Please, come on. Aparna. It won't be going on Facebook, don't worry. Yeah, we're looking forward for something like this for the memories.
Okay. Yeah. I'm giving my presentation. ஃபோட்டோ எடுக்கும்போது பேசக்கூடாதா?